Albert of Saxony was a German philosopher known for his contributions to logic and physics. He was Bishop of Halberstadt from 1366 until his death. Albert was born at Rickensdorf near Helmstedt, the son of a farmer in a small village, but because of his talent, he was sent to study at the University of Prague and the University of Paris. At Paris, he became a Master of Arts, and held this post from 1351 until 1362. He also studied theology at the College of Sorbonne, although without receiving a degree. In 1353, he was rector of the University of Paris. After 1362, Albert went to the court of Pope Urban V in Avignon as an envoy of Rudolf IV, Duke of Austria, in order to negotiate the founding of the University of Vienna. The negotiations were successful, and Albert became the first rector of this university in 1365. In 1366, Albert was elected Bishop of Halberstadt, Halberstadt being the diocese in which he was born. As Bishop of Halberstadt, he allied himself with Magnus with the Necklace, Duke of Brunswick-Lüneburg, against Gebhard of Berg, Bishop of Hildesheim, and was taken prisoner by Gebhard in the Battle of Dinklage in 1367. He died at Halberstadt in 1390. Philosophy. Albert was a pupil of Jean Buridan and was very much influenced by Buridan's teachings on physics and logic. As a natural philosopher, he worked in the tradition of John Buridan and contributed to the spread of Parisian natural philosophy throughout Italy and Central Europe. Similar to Buridan, Albert combined critical analysis of language with epistemological realism. Albert distinguishes, as Buridan did, between what is absolutely impossible or contradictory and what is impossible in the common course of nature, and considers hypotheses under circumstances that are not naturally possible but imaginable given God's absolute power. Albert refused to extend the reference of a physical term to supernatural, purely imaginary possibilities. Later regarded as one of the principal adherents of nominalism, along with his near contemporaries at Paris, John Buridan and Marsilius of Ingen, whose works are often so similar as to be confused with each other. The subsequent wide circulation of Albert's work made him a better-known figure in some areas than more talented contemporaries like Buridan and Nicole Orsmer. Albert's work in logic also shows strong influence by William of Ockham, whose commentaries on the Logica Vetus were made the subject of a series of works called Questions by Albert. Albert of Saxony's teachings on logic and metaphysics were extremely influential. The theory of impetus introduced a third stage to the two-stage theory of Avicenna. Initial stage. Motion is in a straight line in direction of impetus which is dominant while gravity is insignificant. Intermediate stage. Path begins to deviate downwards from straight line as part of a great circle as air resistance slows projectile and gravity recovers. Last stage. Gravity alone draws projectile downwards vertically as all impetus is spent. This theory was a precursor to the modern theory of inertia. Although Buridan remained the predominant figure in logic, Albert's utilized Logica was destined to serve as a popular text because of its systematic nature and also because it takes up and develops essential aspects of the Ockhamist position. Albert accepted Ockham's conception of the nature of a sign. Albert believed that signification rests on a referential relation of the sign to the individual thing, and that the spoken sign depends for its signification on the conceptual sign. Albert followed Ockham in his conception of universals and in his theory of supposition. Specifically, Albert preserved Ockham's notion of simple supposition, the direct reference of a term term to the concept on which it depends when it signifies an extramental thing. Albert followed Occam in his theory of categories and, contrary to Buridan, refused to treat quantity as a feature of reality in its own right, but rather reduced it to a disposition of substance and quality. Albert established signification through a referential relation to a singular thing, defining the relation of the spoken to conceptual signs as a relation of subordination. Albert's treatment of relation was highly original, although, like Occam, he refused to make relations into things distinct from absolute entities. He clearly ascribed them to an act of the soul by which absolute entities are compared and placed in relation to each other. He therefore completely rejected certain propositions Occam had admitted reasonable, even if he did not construe them in the same way. Albert's voluminous collection of Sophismata examined various sentences that raised difficulties of interpretation due to the presence of syncatagrammatic words, terms such as quantifiers and certain prepositions, which, according to medieval logicians, do not have a proper and determinate signification but rather modify the signification of the other terms in the propositions in which they occur. In his Sophismata, he followed William Heytesbury. In his analysis of epistemic verbs or of infinity, Albert admitted that a proposition has its own signification, which is not that of its terms. Just like a syncatagrammatic word, a proposition signifies a mode of a thing. Quote, Albert made use of the idea of the distinguishable signification of the proposition in defining truth and in dealing with insolubles, or paradoxes of self-reference. In this work he shows that since every proposition, by its very form, signifies that it is true, an insoluble proposition will turn out to be false because it will signify at once both that it is true and that it is false. Albert also authored commentaries on Ars Vetus, a set of 25 questions logicales that involved semantical problems and the status of logic, and questions on the posterior analytics. Albert explored in a series of disputed questions the status of logic and semantics, as well as the theory of reference and truth. Albert was influenced by English logicians and was influential in the diffusion of terminist logic in Central Europe. Albert is considered a major contributor in his theory of consequences, found in his Per Utilis Logica. Albert took a major step forward in the medieval theory of logical deduction, but it was his commentary on Aristotle's Physics that was especially widely read. Many manuscripts of it can be found in France and Italy, in Erfurt and Prague. Albert's Physics basically guaranteed the transmission of the Parisian tradition in Italy, where it was authoritative along with the works of Heytesbury and John Dumbleton. His commentary on Aristotle's De Caelo was also influential, eventually eclipsing Buridan's commentary on this text. Blasius of Parma read it in Bologna between 1379 and 1382. A little later, it enjoyed a wide audience at Vienna. His treatise on proportions was often quoted in Italy where, in addition to the texts of Bradwardine and Hosmer, it influenced the application of the theory of proportions to motion. Albert's commentaries on the Nicomachean Ethics and the Economics also survive, as well as several short mathematical texts, most notably Tractatus Proportionem. Although Albert studied theology in Paris, no theological writings survive. Albert played an essential role in the diffusion throughout Italy and Central Europe of Parisian ideas which bore the mark of Buridan's teachings, but which were also clearly shaped by Albert's own grasp of English innovations. At the same time, Albert was not merely a compiler of the work of others. He knew how to construct proofs of undeniable originality on many topics in logic and physics. Works: Per Utilis Logica Magistri Alberti de Saxonia, Venice 1522 and Hildesheim 1974. Albert of Saxony's 25 Disputed Questions on Logic, a critical edition of his Questions circa Logicam, by Michael J. Fitzgerald, Leiden, Brill, 2002. Questions in Artem Veterum, critical edition by Angel Munoz Garcia, Maracaibo, Venezuela, Universidad del Zulia, 1988. Questions on the posterior analytics. Questions logicalis, de consequentis, attributed, de losses dialecticis, attributed, sophismata e insolubilia e obligations, Paris 1489 and Hildesheim 1975. Expositio Questions in Aristotelis Physicam ad Albertum de Saxonia attributare, critical edition by Benoit Pater, Leuven, Peters Publishers, 1999. Questions subtilissime in Libros Aristotelis de Caelo e Mundo, Venetiis, 1492. Questions subtilissime super Libros Posteriorum, the Venetiis, 1497. Hildesheim 1986. Alberti de Saxonia. Questions in Aristotelis de Caelo, critical edition by Benoit Pater, Leuven, Peters Publishers, 2008. De Latitudinibus, Padua 1505, De Latitudinibus Formarum, De Maximo e Minimo, De Quadratura Circuli, question on the squaring of the circle, Tractatus Proportionum, Venice 1496 and Vienna 1971, editor Hubertus L. Boussard, modern editions and English translations. Tractatus Proportionum, Der Tractatus Proportionum von Albert von Sachsen, aus der Akademie der Wissenschaften, Ma. Nat. Class, Denkschriften 116-44-72. Springer, Vienna, 1971. Per utilize Logica, Latin text and Spanish translation by A. Munoz Garcia, Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, 1988. Questions in Artem Veterum, Latin text and Spanish translation by A. Munoz Garcia, Maracaibo, Universidad del Zulia, 1988. De Proprietate Terminorum, edited by C. Kann die Eigenschaften der Termini, Brill, Leiden, 1993. Questions super Libros Physicorum, edited by B. Pater. Expositio Questions in Aristotelis Physicam ad Albertum de Saxonia attributare, Leuven, Peters, 1999. Questions circa Logicam, 25 Disputed Questions on Logic, trans. Michael J. Fitzgerald, Dallas Medieval Texts and Translations 9, Leuven and Paris, Peters, 2010.